Yo, 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 what is up, YouTube? Today is Thursday, September 30th, 2021. If you're new here, I am BK Brad Kellner. If you're old here, I am BK Brad Kellner. Appreciate y'all stopping by 2 days ahead of the Longhorns matchup against TCU. Yes, the purple kryptonite. You know, for a while, K-State was purple kryptonite for Texas football. Over the last few years, TCU has become the purple kryptonite for the Longhorn football program. I think every Texas fan knows it by now, but TCU is 7-2 against the Longhorns since joining the Big 12. Gary Patterson has had Texas's number, whether it was Mac Brown, Charlie Strong, Tom Herman, it didn't matter. GP found a way to get his teams up and ready to go for Texas each and every year. And yeah, the Horny Toads have had the Horns number over the last decade. So Sark and company trying to reverse the curse, trying to turn the tide and pick up a dub in Fort Worth this weekend. Please like this video if you haven't yet. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet. Appreciate the continued love and support. Tons of Texas football content, tons of Texas Longhorn athletics content on this channel all of the time. So subscribe and tap that notification bell if you'd be so kind, so you are always informed whenever I drop new content. So it's TCU week, and TCU has been a thorn in the side for Texas over the last decade. But guys, TCU is not that good. And the problem has been TCU hasn't always been good when they've beaten Texas in the last 9 years, but they just find ways to beat Texas. This TCU football team is coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss against SMU in the battle for the Iron Skillets last weekend. Great rivalry name, by the way. Underrated rivalry name. SMU went into Fort Worth, not a far trip, and just dominated TCU. I know the final score was 42-34. That's a one-possession game technically, but SMU was dominant on the lines of scrimmage. They ran for 350-plus against TCU, and they had no problems with the patented Gary Patterson 4-2-5 defense. So when you think TCU, you think Gary Patterson, and you think of great defense. And that was not the case for TCU against SMU. That has not been the case for TCU all season long here in 2021. They're 2-1 overall. One of their two wins came against Duquesne, which is an FCS school. They crushed them. 45-3 was the final in that game. That was the season opener for TCU. But the Horned Frogs escaped Cal. They won that game by 2 in Fort Worth. I think TCU was like an 11.5-point favorite, and they needed to hold Cal on a 2-point conversion on in the last 5 minutes of the game to hold on for the victory. Now, they got the win. They got the ball back. They ran out the clock, so they're able to preserve that dub. But yeah, TCU, a near 12-point favorite, survived by the hair of their chinny chin against Cal. I don't know why I said that. I don't think I've ever said that expression in my entire life, but you get the point. They escaped against a very average Cal football team that's 2-2. And then against SMU, yeah, once again, they were humiliated. Like, I was reading some TCU beat writers earlier this week, and they called that loss humiliating, and they said they basically got punked. And if you watch that game, that's kind of what happened. TCU's defense just had no answer, and they got worked in the trenches. They got worked everywhere, but especially in the trenches against SMU. SMU's a good football team, but look, they don't have the talent that Texas has. So Texas should be able to do some of the things, hopefully all of the things, but at least some of the things that SMU did last week against the Horned Frogs. TCU's offense has been solid this year. I'm kind of doing a little scouting report on TCU, and then we'll sort of look into this matchup, who has the advantage at particular spots on the field. And can Sark find a way to get a coaching advantage over Gary Patterson? Because the last 3 Texas head coaches have not found a way to get a schematic advantage against GP. I almost opened this video playing Take a Step Back, Gary Patterson's country music song that he dropped last year, but I didn't want GP coming after me the way he went after SMU after they posted some stuff on social media making fun of that song. Boy, there was some extracurricular stuff going on the field after that game last week. It's a bad loss for TCU and big win for SMU, and they bragged about it for sure. TCU's offense has been pretty solid, guys. I mean, against SMU, they put up 34 points. They, I think, had nearly 8 yards per play, 446 total yards of offense, 1 turnover, 2 punts. Like, they were pretty solid offensively. That wasn't the issue, and that wasn't the issue against Cal. They put up 34 against Cal, and I think averaged around 8 yards a play against the Golden Bears too. The problem for TCU has been their defense. Their offense, look, Max Duggan, Still a little shaky, still a little inconsistent at times. Now, whenever he plays Texas, he turns into the Heisman frontrunner. So that's something we have to look out for. And I'll give you his numbers against Texas in the past here in a second. But he's been okay, but he's got some pieces to work with. Zach Evans is a stud. Anybody who follows high school football, anybody who follows recruiting knows that name. Zach Evans had one of the weirdest, most tumultuous recruitments in recent history, but he can play. 5-star kid, ended up at TCU from the Houston area, and he's been balling out so far this season. Showed some signs towards the end of 2020. He's been really, really good. Arguably, I wouldn't even argue it. I think it's for sure. I guess that means I would argue it, but he's been TCU's best offensive player this year. They've got some weapons on the outside. Tay Barber is still there. Feels like that guy's been there forever. Quentin Johnston, the one-time Texas commit, a stud, high 4-star kid. He's a wide receiver. He's still there. J.D. Spielman, transfer from Nebraska. Big fan of his game. Good returner as well, but a solid receiver. Like, there are pieces, there are weapons for Max Duggan and Doug Meacham and this TCU offense. That hasn't been the issue thus far. Once again, they've scored at least 34 points in every game this season. The issue has been the defense. Now, I will say penalties have been a problem, and they were a problem for TCU offensively. They had 9, and some of them were drive killers against SMU. So not always super disciplined. Some bad holds, some false starts by the offensive line. It hasn't been perfect for TCU offensively, but my point is that hasn't been their biggest issue. The biggest issue has been the defense. They gave up 3 to Duquesne, but they gave up 30-plus in the 2 FCS games they've played this year. SMU had 595 yards of offense. They held the ball for 8 minutes longer than TCU, and I think I mentioned this earlier, SMU ran for 350 against TCU last weekend, nearly 7 yards per carry. So to put things in perspective, like Texas ran all over Texas Tech last weekend in Austin. Texas ran for 336 yards on 6.5 yards per carry. SMU against TCU, which should have a better defense than Texas Tech, ran for more yards and slightly more yards per carry than Texas even did. And once again, think about how dominant Texas was on the ground last week. SMU did that and then some against TCU in Fort Worth last Saturday. The D-line has problems. They're not the same D-line that we're used to seeing. The secondary has issues, tackling problems. Almost felt like I was watching a mid-2010s Texas defense at times watching TCU play SMU last week. Tackling issues galore. The secondary had some problems. They're bringing in 2 new safeties, right? They lost Trayvon Merrick and Ardarius Washington, who, for my money, was the best safety combo in college football last season. Both of those guys are off in the NFL. The 2 new safeties just aren't getting it done. A lot of free releases by receivers in both games against FBS opponents. That's been an issue there. There's some talented pieces there. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, a corner. He's a stud. He's an all-conference caliber player, but he's not good enough to overcome some of the other secondary woes that TCU has had thus far. So, yeah, it's just stuff that you're not used to seeing from Gary Patterson-led defenses. And look, TCU lost a lot of players. They lost those 2 safeties. They lost Garrett Wallow, who was their best linebacker, who's with the Texans now. They lost a couple of D-line starters too. But still, like, they've lost guys in the past, and Gary Patterson just finds a way to figure it out and puts out a really good defense seemingly every single year. It just hasn't clicked for TCU thus far in 2021. So, yeah, I mean, you look at the Big 12 stats, guys. TCU is currently 8th in the conference in both scoring and total defense. I couldn't tell you the last time we saw that. So you'd like to think Texas has the edge there. I mean, Texas has the edge seemingly everywhere. Texas has more talent than TCU, but that's been the case, I would argue, every single time these teams have lined up against one another. Maybe sans 2014 when you had that really good TCU football team that missed the college football playoff. But for the most part, like on paper especially, Texas has had more talent than TCU. They just haven't been able to find ways to beat TCU. And I found this interesting, guys. So everybody talks about TCU being 7-2 against Texas since joining the Big 12. This is a bizarre stat. Like, Gary Patterson's not shy about things. He loves beating Texas. He hates Texas. He takes a lot of pride in his record against Texas. This is amazing to me. TCU is now 2-8 the week before playing Texas since joining the Big 12. 2-8 the week before playing Texas since joining the Big 12. And I think one of those wins came against Kansas. So there's a little bit of an overlook factor for TCU ahead of the Texas game. And hell, they maybe had that in a rivalry game last week against SMU. But yeah, they're always ready for Texas. And I don't know what Gary Patterson says or does that makes them ready to play against Texas, but it's like they are so excited to play Texas, at least it seems this way, that they can't even focus and get their ish together the week before. 2-8, and of course that includes this year. That includes the loss to SMU, which happened last weekend, the week before Texas. So just a bizarre little stat right there, and it just proves the point that Gary Patterson really enjoys beating Texas, and he gets his teams up and ready to play against Texas. So the question is, guys, can Sark get over the purple kryptonite? Can he solve the TCU curse? Sark's done a pretty good job to this point. His first test, in my opinion, at least his first on-field test, there are plenty of tests that go into being the head coach of Texas football. But, when Texas lost that game in humiliating fashion to Arkansas a couple of weeks ago, that was the first little bit of adversity that Sark had experienced during his tenure in Austin. And, well, the Longhorns have been dominant the last 2 weeks against lesser competition for sure. One of those games was against Rice, but still 58-0 against the Owls, the largest margin of victory for Texas since 2005. And then they put up 70 against Texas Tech last weekend in Austin. It wasn't all perfect. The defense gave up bigger plays, more big plays than I would have liked, but still put up 70 points, one shy of your school's Big 12 record. Not too bad for the first conference game for Steve Sarkisian. So what is that? 128-35. Texas has outscored its two opponents since that embarrassing loss in Fayetteville. They passed that test with flying colors. They responded to adversity in a big, big way. And I think everybody feels better about Texas right now than they did a couple of weeks ago. Thanks, Captain Obvious. This is another test. This is kind of a double test for Steve Sarkisian here. The first one is finding a way to beat TCU, right? Finding a way to get over the Gary Patterson hump and just beating that guy and beating that team. That's been an issue for a while. The second sort of test for Sark is, okay, the Longhorns have had some success, and way too many times over the last 12 years, while this program has been in sort of purgatory, the Longhorns have not responded to success well. Like they get a little taste of success, and then they just completely collapse and crap the bed, and they revert back to bad Texas. Well, Texas has had a little bit of success. They've gotten a lot of pats on the back. I'm sure they got some after Rice, but it was still Rice. After you beat Texas Tech, kind of a rivalry game, you put up 70 spots on them. Like, I'm sure a lot of people texted Sark and his coaching staff mates saying, hey, that was impressive. Good job. And I'm positive that the Texas football players who have been walking around campus going to class this week have gotten pats on the back and congrats from fellow students. And they've gotten texts and FaceTimes and calls from friends and family saying, good job. That was awesome. That has caused problems for Texas in the past. The longest winning streak for Texas in either of the last 2 years was 3 games. Obviously, they're at 2 right now. A win on Saturday would make it 3. That's the same as the last 2 years. I'd love for it to be 4, but got to get to 3 first. Look, my point is, if you follow this team for the last 12 years, you know that this team has let success get to its head in the past. That might have happened in the Arkansas game, right? I mean, Texas was complete. They played a great game for 4 quarters against a solid Louisiana team. I'm sure a lot of people congratulated Sark. First game as a Texas head coach. Hey, great job. Nice win. Texas covered the spread. They looked really impressive in that football game. That was a ranked win for the Horns. And then what do they do the following week? Well, they crap the bed against Arkansas. Like a little bit of success, and then they fell apart the week later. Let's see what happens here. So kind of a double test there for Steve Sarkisian. TCU's defense does not look good, guys. They've got holes on that side of the football. Meanwhile, Texas's offense has been rolling the last couple of weeks. Really, since Casey Thompson was inserted into the starting lineup in the third quarter against Arkansas, this offense has been rolling. And Casey Thompson, I know he's thrown a couple of picks in the last 2 weeks, but for the most part, he's been cool, calm, and collected. He's been great. And you go back to the Alamo Bowl against Colorado, he's had 26 drives as the quarterback for this Texas offense. The Longhorns have scored on 23 of them. 21 of those 23 scores were touchdowns. They haven't punted in either of the last 2 games. Cameron Dicker hasn't attempted a field goal in either of the last 2 games. Odds are those are going to change this week against TCU, but, man, it doesn't take away from how impressive the Texas offense has been the last couple of games. But another road test for Texas too, right? Second road game of the year. The first one did not go well. It'll be a hostile environment. It'll be a sellout. The TCU fans hate Texas as much as Gary Patterson hates Texas. Even though it's 11 a.m., they'll be ready to go. And who knows, guys? This could be the last time Texas plays in Fort Worth for a while. We don't know when Texas will make the move to the SEC. I guess technically, as of right now, the Horns will be up there in 2023, and that will be the last time they play. But it could happen before then, right? And this could be Texas's last year in the Big 12. My guess is it's either this year or next year. That'll be the Horns' last year in the Big 12, which means this would be Texas's last trip to Amon G. Carter Stadium in a while. So TCU fans know that. They're not dumb. This might be their last chance to rip on Texas for a while. Curious what the officiating is going to be, too, on the road for Texas. Also in a close game. I assume this would be a closer game than 70-35. We were talking about this on this channel. I've heard some other people talk about this too. Like, what are the refs going to be like for Texas this season? Are they going to try to screw Texas a time or two whenever they get the opportunity? Is Bob Bowlesby telling these refs, like, hey, if you can call an extra hold on Texas, do it. All right. If you can call some ticky-tack stuff, a la the Oklahoma State game in Austin with Charlie Strong, find a way to do that. I wonder if that's going on. Didn't notice the officiating too much last week because it was a beatdown, but if this is a close, highly contested game, perhaps a storyline to look out for. I expect this to be a close game, guys. I really do. TCU's been bad this year by TCU standards, and Texas has looked really good the last 2 weeks, but I've just got Gary Patterson PTSD. GP, TCU, PTSD. That's what I've got. So this is going to be a tough one for Texas. Can Sark get over the hump? I mean, I'm looking at all the defensive breakdowns TCU had last week, and I'm thinking about all of the successes Texas has had on offense, and it feels like they should be able to pick up right where they left off against Texas Tech. But will it happen on the road? Hostile environment. TCU ready to go for Texas? I'm not so sure. Hopefully, Max Duggan. I teased this earlier a long time ago. Sorry it took me so long to follow up on this tease. Hopefully, Max Duggan does not look like a Heisman candidate when he plays Texas, because his first 2 meetings against the Horns, he's been awesome. 2-0 against Texas. Last year in Austin, completed 67% of his passes, which is well above his career average. 310 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 turnovers, sacked 1 time. 2 years ago in Fort Worth, 345 total yards, 3 total touchdowns, 1 interception, but that was his second highest rated game of the year in 2019. The highest was Kansas. So Max Duggan has been awesome against UT. He's been very meh against everybody else, and TCU fans were hoping he would take that step in year 3. Hasn't quite happened. He's been fine. I don't want to say he's been bad this year. He's been fine. But whenever he goes up against the burnt orange and white, I don't know what it is. He's not from Texas or anything like that. Whenever he plays UT, though, he has his best stuff. Hopefully that will not be the case. Hopefully the Texas defense, especially on the back end, can be a little bit surer than they were last week. Maybe some human nature. We talked about this earlier this week. When you're up by 1 million points and your offense is doing what it's doing, human nature comes in, and maybe you take your foot off the gas defensively, and you know that you can get away with having a bad play or 2. I don't think you can get away with that against TCU, and you're not going to get away with that against Oklahoma next week too. But we'll talk more about Oklahoma next week. Hopefully the Longhorns can extend this winning streak or make it a winning streak. Depends on your thoughts, Bull Durham. But hopefully they could find a way to break this TCU curse, because I'm tired of losing to TCU, guys. I'm so tired of losing to TCU. I know y'all are too. We'll see what happens. Texas, a 5-point favorite. Money's been coming in on the Horns. It opened up at 3.5, I think. Now it's up to 5. If I had to pick, I'd pick TCU to cover the 5, guys. There's the PTSD coming in. Texas is 5 points better. They've looked 5 points better than TCU looking at both teams this season. But I think TCU makes this a tough one in Fort Worth this Saturday. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to hit. Josh Moore should be good to go. Shout out to Chip Brown, Horns 24/7. I think Joshua Moore is going to play. Got hurt in practice yesterday. No Troy O'Meary. Apparently he's going to have season-ending surgery for his leg. That sucks. 2 years in a row, we were optimistic and hopeful that that guy could be an impact player for this offense. We're going to have to wait till year 3 for that to happen for T.O. Unfortunate. Feel for the kid too. But Texas, outside of that, relatively healthy going into this game against TCU. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens Saturday at 11 o'clock. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Please smash that like button if you haven't yet. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. Shout out to Last Stand Hats for sponsoring this channel. If you use the promo code BK10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your purchase of any Last Stand hat. Comment below with your thoughts, your score predictions for this matchup this weekend, and whatever else is on your mind. I'll try to respond in a timely manner, and whatever other topics you want me to hit on this channel, please let me know. Shameless plug, tune in ESPN 97.5 in Houston every weekday from 3 to 7 p.m. The Wheelhouse is the name of the show, ESPN975.com if you're outside the listening area. All right, guys, I think that'll do it for today's video. Appreciate the continued love and support. Until next time, y'all stay safe. Y'all stay healthy. Where we at? There we are. And hook 'em.